Hello, welcome back to the Inner. Today I'm joined by my brother, Khepra Ptah.
Thank you for allowing me to introduce myself. I've been involved in Mysticism for a huge portion of my life. Some would say, well, how did you get into this? Well, let's
Hmm.
say it came to me when I was a child due to things that I discovered under my father's bed, like what they call the Egyptian Book of the Dead or the Purdom Harum Ger, and also visions and things that I experienced, kind of similar to some of the things that you had told me yourself. So I had apparitions come to me. I had um, I see the symbols of the Ankh when I was small and everything else. And I didn't consciously remember what it was, but I decided I was going to follow it, that thing, uh, to where I'm at now. So it definitely was the key to my understanding, let alone being considered the key to eternal. This led to me getting into metaphysics. My father, he had been into the theosophical teachings, but he had also been into Louisiana hoodoo and a little bit of Vodun. He actually introduced me to my first West African prayer, or should I say Haitian prayer to the Baron, and also he used to talk to me about all these other things like, human civilization, how it began, how it is going to end and how it begins again. And sometimes he would scare me because he would say things that weren't considered part of the norm. But what this led me to in life is to explore different modalities, the nature of human consciousness, our abilities, our latent ability, and as well as how to communicate with the indwelling divine, as some would say God. So I'm a Reiki master. I've been one for well over maybe close to 30 years now. I've also been around the Yoruba culture for, about at least 30 years. I have been initiated into various West African traditions, you Mauritius and Ptah. I've also have explored the Congo traditions. And of course, you already know about my affiliation with Kemet. I've learned with a lot of teachers around that, including Baba Heru and Baba Hedi Khepra. I've chatted with Nkundishi, I met Dr. Kaba, and so forth. And also, I've affiliated with ASCAP, So all of this helped shape my growth as far as who I am and what it is that I'm into and what I'm exploring.
Okay, cool. So, one of the topics that you have a book coming out. Talk a little bit about solarization.
Solarization is a play on words, solarization. So not only is it talking about your inner illumination, but your realization of the indwelling divinity in the form of your soul. See, so the soul works as like an interface between the spiritual stuff and your physical stuff, but it also is the aspect of you that comes from deep within that expresses itself. And once you're aligned with your true intention in life, your soul, the energy of your soul begins to radiate from within to without. So solarization is based a lot on my studies of Kemet. But as time went on, I began to notice patterns, you see, and it kind of reflects what I learned, with my father and everything else. And I began to understand that you have what I call solarized civilizations. And these civilizations tend to have pyramids. They tend to have similar mythologies. And they always speak about some type of birth, some type of resurrection, and the various archetypes or the Christ, Christo, Krishna, however you may call that, this being always represents an aspect of ourselves that goes through life, comes about through a miraculous conception, and then it goes through a birth and a resurrection, or at the end of their life may mark the beginning of something new, and so forth. So solarization is about you awakening that Christ, Krishna consciousness within you, the divine nature in which we all have. We just have to remember, in other words, bring the scattered pieces back to oneness.
That's pretty cool. I noticed you mentioned Krishna. Talk about your journey into, I guess, embracing some of the Hindu aspects.
Okay, another thing that came to me when I was really young, my mother, now she was a devout Christian. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe that everything happens for a particular reason. My mother had these books on her shelf. Now, I don't know why she had them because it's not something that she would actually take the time to study. But I guess someone had donated those books to her, and because the book covers looked so nice, she decided to keep them on her bookshelf. So one day I started looking into these books, and I saw these, four-headed deities like Lord Brahma and four deities like Vishnu, and they were blue colored. I was like, wow, what is this? And all this weird writing. Later on, I find out that was Sanskrit, and I couldn't have been no more than maybe 9 or 10 years old at the time when I encountered this. So, of course, I didn't understand what I was reading, but I remember them talking about the soul and reincarnation and everything else, and I found that kind of fascinating. I still didn't quite understand, but something about it pulled me. So, fast forward all the way into the 90s when I was, in my 20s, or should I say, at the beginning of my 20s at least. I had a vision when I was meditating with a brother, and I saw Haru standing next to Krishna and standing next to the familiar archetype in which we know as Jesus. They were all standing on top of a mountain, and I seen a priest that actually kind of looked like a Hare Krishna in my vision, and he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Behold the Christ." And in this particular vision, he saw it was a female, there was a sister standing on top of the mountain. It was a woman, and she had locks, right? And when I came out of meditation, when I forgot to tell you that I was actually meditating with a brother, a friend of mine, who we actually entered the Lukumi tradition together at some point. He saw her too in his vision. The version that I saw, she was dressed in regular clothes. He saw her dressed and decked out in a white robe. So when we came out of trance and meditation, I said, "That's interesting. I was revealed a female Christ." He said, "That's interesting because he saw it too." Right? Now, Krishna was also in that particular vision. In fact, he was maybe in his four-armed Vishnu form. So, I have had different encounters with Krishna along with that, that interesting situation where we've seen the female version of Christ that came about in that particular meditation. And I believe at the time we were listening to Ron F. Men's Ong Bang Dahum chant for us, for our set. So, so that goes into another direction. But, Krishna led me into looking into more Hinduism. I met a sister by the name of Kashaya Mayadasi. She had studied, Prabhupada's material because she had also took the journey in ISKCON. She was in the Hare Krishna movement. And I hung out with her. I ended up going to New York for a while. I met some of the priests there, you know. And I learned a few mantras. I learned a few chants. I mean, a lot of that stuff was already coming to me by the time I went out there anyway. So I got into another teaching that dealt with the Merkaba. And that person, they shared with me what was called the Gayatri mantra. And then I eventually began to study under Baba Hedi Khepra, who was another student of the Kemetic legacy and a very powerful teacher. Uh,
Hmm.
he taught me about, Lord Shiva. He had been a devotee of Lord Shiva as well. He had also, genetically, he was Yoruba, so he also, you know, uh, accepted the Yoruba pantheon. But he passed the Gayatri mantra to me again, and I also had received the Mrityunjaya mantra from a sister who was, they said, was the incarnation of the goddess Saraswati. So I met her in person at the Quest bookstore, the Theosophical Society in Seattle. Very beautiful soul.
Yeah, talk a bit more about your mentor, Kafra. I'm struggling with the whole name,
Uh,
but you were telling me a story, and I guess this leads into one of the things I was going to ask you about the Netaru. But if you could kind of share that story.
Now, Hedi Kapra, I had been referred to him by another beautiful sister by the name of Newt Butterfly. She went by Newt Tumuunk. And that was when I first saw a depiction of him. And he was sitting in his pyramid, and he had all the metal netter in the background. And I said, "Oh wow, that's pretty interesting." You know. One day, I seen him on Facebook, and I decided to reach out to him. And he said, contacted me, gave me his number, and I called him up. And then he told me to pick up a weight. I picked it up. He said, "You see, it's at his normal weight." He said, "Put it down." He said, "Now pick it up again." I noticed the weight was heavier. And he said, "Now put it down." And he said, "Now I gotta do some chants to the next root to bring balance back, because he said he had distorted the universal order by causing the weight to become heavier than it was. Right now, he was like a Jedi, you know. This, you know how in Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and it was showing Darth Vader force choke one of his officers through the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Believe it or not, he was able to do something similar to me. He didn't force choke me, but he told me to try to stand still. And he started pushing me with his mind. I couldn't stand still. I tried, and my body kept doing this. He said, what's wrong? Try to stand still." I said, "What are you doing?" And he explained to me that he was working with the power of Netir. He said Netir, so he used the different pronunciation where they say Netir instead of Netter. You know, of course, Baba Heru would say Ether. So the more I learned from him, I discovered that I could develop certain feats as well. He would tell me to chant Anecharak Amanra Nukatera Amara Nukamara 108 times a day. And you know, I begin to feel very elevated after I did that. You know, so first you chant it out loud, then you'll breathe it mentally. Necharak Amara Nukatera Amara Nukamara. He called that the triple Heston. So Anecharak Amara, just show me your face, Amanra. Nukatera Amara, I'm the power of Amanra. Anuka Amanra, I am Amanra. So that triple Hesti also represents 3 stages of realization. You know, the realization that you are the divine, the realization that the divine power dwells within you, and then you go to the highest level where you identify as not being separate from that divine power which exists within us all, as well as pervades the universe. So Eddie Khepra, he's in spirit, you know. He left his physical body about I'll say about 4 years ago, you know. And he kind of had made a few hints that he was going to leave. He would tell me about his experience with someone who he had studied under, who was into Taoism, and how without his physical body, his intelligence and his consciousness was able to still subdue him at times, you know, just to show that what you are, you're beyond being a physical being. You know, the physical body is just a temporary vehicle in which we express ourselves to at the moment. Your consciousness is a reference within the physical body, but ultimately we are pure consciousness taking various forms and identities. So there's really no beginning and there's really no end. We just are.
Yeah. All right. So talk a bit more since we're on the topic of like the Netaru. What has been your experience with the Netaru as like a personal engager?
First time I've encountered what I consider my first encounter with the Netaru was when they sent the blue electric ink to me when I was a child, around maybe 11 years old. Now, I've always been attracted to that symbol. Okay, I didn't recognize what it was when I was young, but I had seen it. And what's interesting enough is that I actually first seen it in a Bible. It was a Bible with Coptic symbolism in the back of it. And I wish I had that Bible, I'd show it to you. But it had the Coptic version of the And it had these Coptic versions of Egyptian symbols or Cometian symbols in the back of the Bible. That's the first time I recall seeing the And that symbol actually stood up to me then, you know. So I used to have these weird experiences when I feel like I couldn't move at night. I see all this green energy around me. I could feel like there was other presence in the room with me. I feel like my ears would throb. I felt like the hair on the back of my neck would raise. And it would scare me because I was a child and nobody was explaining to me what that was, right? I had experiences where one time I woke up and I was like a balloon bouncing off the ceiling. And what it is I was having an out of body experience. I didn't understand what was going on then. All I know is that nobody could really explain what was happening to me. Then one night, I experienced the room being saturated with this green energy, and I'm really young. I'm scared. My mother happened to have been like in the room, kind of kitty corner to mine. She had her door open and I said, "Mom, can I get in the bed next to you? Because I'm scared. I just saw something." Here's what's crazy. My mother said she saw something too. What I seen in the hallway was an electric blue arc, and it floated down the hallway and disappeared into the darkness. I told my mother that I'd seen something. I thought maybe it was like an angelic being with his arms stretched out to the side or a robed figure. She said that what she thought she was seeing was a demon. She saw what she thought was a winged being. She said she saw it go past the door. Now, I'm not expecting everybody to believe this, but this is my experience. Okay. I told my mother, she said, okay, I'm about to get my Bible. She got the Bible. She opened up to one of the Psalms, and she was from Louisiana. They know how to use those Psalms to make things happen. We went to my bedroom. She sat on the bed, pulled out her Bible, sat next to me, and started chanting the Psalms. I can't remember exactly which of the Psalms it was, but it felt like after a while, the bed was moving. It felt like the walls were moving. Okay. Then my mother touched me, and around that time, Nintendo had come out with a robot and a gun that came with it. When she touched me, the robot on the dresser activated and moved its arms. I'd never seen my mother run so fast in my life. She ran out and I ran out with her. Something happened when she touched me, okay? And it has something to do with that blue ink. So there was also times when I'd have Anpu, who is also known as Anubis, come to me in dreams. The first time I remember when it happened was when I was with a particular young lady, and this was a lady that I thought we were gonna be in it for the long haul. He showed up when I was with her in the dream. Oh, by the way, there was a beautiful green or emerald green bust of a saw sitting on like this pillar in the middle of a hallway. It's almost as if in that particular dream I was in the hallways of a mentor, and I was with her, and I was holding her hand, and I was walking to the bust of a saw or Hussein, trying to get her to look at it. And then next thing you know, Anpu in the form of a jackal appeared and started barking and snarling. So I let her go. I let her hand go. Then he disappeared. I grabbed her hand again. He appeared and started barking and snarling. Then I let her hand go again. This time I decided to walk forward without her, and I was able to visit the bust of Osir and look at it. It was a beautiful emerald green bust. Um, so I guess I don't know what type of material. It looked like it was made out of maybe jade or something like that, or some form of it. Anyway, in real life, or actually maybe the dream was real life, in this reality, I ended up having two breakups with her. And finally, I decided to move on. So what Anpu was telling me, I was not going to be able to move forward. Okay. All right. So things went awry and we eventually separated. It was not our destiny to be together. Another time he came to me was when I was going to get initiated into the Yoruba tradition. He came in the form of a shadow chasing me through kind of like some Freddy Krueger shit at the time. How Freddy Krueger was in his boiler room. It was almost like I was in a similar place. Okay, now it wasn't exactly a boiler room, but I ended up going through one of the tubes, and I meditated on that. That symbolized me going through a birth canal, but the tube just looked like a pipe. and I went trying to hide from Anpu because he was scary. I saw his shadow. He was breathing. He was like, and he was chasing me. It's almost like I had to run away from it, you know. So I went through the tube and came out the other side, and I saw two pistons, going up and down. And I saw someone that resembled Will Smith, like a comedian. He looked like Will Smith. He was standing under the piston, and the piston smashed him and turned him into a pile of green and brown towels or blankets. And the other was a stack of green and yellow blankets. Now, if you know anything about the Yoruba tradition of Ifa, the green and the brown represents the lineage that I actually got initiated into. The green and the yellow represents more of the Lukumi, and to my understanding, those colors are connected to Benin. Um, at the time, my lineage had a connection with Odiremo. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. I ended up getting initiated into that tradition, into what they now, they may consider the Shea. I come from the lineage of Dr. Alpha Pega, who in turn initiated my Baba and Ifa by the name of Baba Femi. But very, very straightforward, down to earth brother, who had actually been part of the craft of Hamid Ra. He had studied under Dr. Yang. So anyway, one day I decided to talk to a Vodun teacher because you see, my father had told me I had Vodun ancestors. He talked about my great grandmother and everything else. So I talked to a priest he dealt with the 21 divisions. And I didn't tell him nothing about myself. He just asked me if I had Egyptian deities come to me. And by the way, I've also had Het Haru come to me as well. Okay. I had Haru, I laid by, all the beings that come to me for this time. He asked me if I had Egyptian deities that would come and visit me. I didn't tell him my name was Khepra Ptah. I gave him my birth name, which was Lionel Jamal Williams at the time. So he asked me, do you have Egyptian deities come to you? I said, yes. He said, that's because Legba is one of the spirits that are around you. He also told me that I had Baron Samedi around. Well, what's interesting is my father gave me a prayer for Baron Samedi years ago because my great grandmother was into the Vodun down in the south. And his story about her is that she was a voodoo priest by night and a Catholic by day. And for those who are familiar with the diasporic tradition, you'll learn that the Orishas and the Loa were both hidden behind Catholic saints. But as far as the Protestant movement, the Protestant church, where they stripped everything from us because they would not allow you to speak your language, they would not allow you to play the drums, and they weren't going to allow any saints around. So all you had was Jesus. So that's when you get that, you need Jesus from, But we had forgot a lot too because, well, if you have a Christian upbringing, you're going to learn that you have to leave the past in the past and just move forward. A lot of times the elders didn't want to talk about some of the things they experienced. And a lot of it had to do with not because they were being stingy with tradition or teaching, but because of things that had went down that they may not have been too proud of because of the humiliating experience of slavery, the Jim Crow, and how you may have had to have run for cover in dealing with the law. And also there are other things that went down within the family. So keep in mind that unfortunately, due to the breeding process, there was times when relatives were forced to lay with each other and reproduce, and the offspring were used as part of the slave labor or whatever agenda that they had at that time. So unfortunately, that shame of that experience was often passed down from generation to generation too. That's something we don't talk about. But because that's in our subconscious, in our collective psyche, that's one of what I consider to be one of the generational curses that have to be dealt with, so it can change and transform and transmute.
Okay.
As far as Egyptian or Cometian deities coming to me, there's another story in which Heteru had come to me. Now, this also goes back to when I spoke about the Hinduism and why I studied so much of it as well. I had this dream that me and my mother, for whatever reason, we were having a heated conversation. Then Heteru came about and told me that I'm not allowed to speak to my mother in such a manner. I said, okay, well, I'm not going to argue with whoever this was because I didn't know who she was at the time. She had taken the form of an elder. And she ended up taking me into a room. She showed me a stack of books. There was a stack of books that were in Medu and another stack of books that was in Sanskrit. And some books were mixed with Medu and Sanskrit. None of it was in English. Somehow I was able to sit and walk and read through these books, and she supervised me as if she was teaching me about what was in the contents of these books that were in these different languages. Then she transformed herself into a tree. Now, in Kemet, Heteru's tree is a sycamore tree. But in this version, in this dream that I had, she had transformed into what looked more like a baobab tree and had the head of a hippopotamus. And her roots were above the surface of the ground and they were wiggling. And you know what she was saying? I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And it was probably a hint for me to get more into breath control. You know, now maybe a couple of decades later with the George Floyd situation of him saying I can't breathe, that was kind of eerie for me because, you know, what I recall in that particular dream and even what happened with Floyd Mayweather. I mean Floyd Mayweather. So George Floyd. Oh my goodness, I got boxing on the brain today. George Floyd. He was not able to breathe, right? You know, his circulation was cut off. That symbolizes, for the way I look at it, our lack of ability to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
For us to master our own breath, which is tied into the spirit, hence the word breath, you know, coming from the word, being linked to the word spirit and spiritus, meaning to breathe. So, in order for us to be in contact with our spirit, we need to breathe. We need to also make sure that we're taking care of the environment so that not only can we breathe, but everything in the environment in which we are connected to can breathe. So it's kind of a hint to remind me of who I was, what my purpose on earth was. And eventually I found myself getting into the sustainability movement. I got into the green movement. Remember, as far as the green aura that I had seen around myself when I was young. All of that, it added up to that time period when things began to come together for me as what I'm supposed to be doing. Then I went to a seance. And a seance years ago, they told me that, well, the spirit wanted me to write a book. Hmm. And here I am working on that book. At first, the first segments of it came about through automatic writing when I went into trance and just started writing. Then I began to study what I was writing to see if it, you know, checked out. And interesting enough, a lot of it actually did, you know. So it's kind of like I was given a foundation to work with and to study off of
All right. So you mentioned your connection with Yoruba, and I was telling you before that it's hard to find people who are connected to Yoruba who's willing to talk about Yoruba. So if you could kind of give us like a brief overview of some of the Orishas.
Okay. Well, the thing about the Yoruba, um, one of the issues with before I go on is it's an initiatory system, right? It's kind of in some ways it's kind of like a closed um, religion. People don't want to call it that, but if you have a priesthood and if there's rules, regulations, you know, a deity and a pantheon and a tradition that you're upholding, then yes. You know, that is a religion. Okay, it's an ATR, African traditional religion. So I just wanted to get that out the way. The thing about it is, because it's initiatory or initiatic tradition, a lot of people are kind of tight-lipped because they feel like they don't want to reveal too many secrets. But a lot of this information has actually been published, So I'm going to share with you, you know, um, experiences, and I think as far as something that may rhyme with a lot of the published material and some of my own conclusions. Now, the Orishas are forces of nature, right? And Orisha is to the Yoruba what the Neter are to the Kamishas. Each Orisha represents a different force. They're emissaries of Olodumare. Olodumare means the divine or one. It breaks down to mean the owner of the everlasting Odu, which is energy patterns of life in scripture that constantly move forward. And it can also be translated to mean the owner of the womb of the rainbow. Okay, so it gets into that. And every Orisha represents a different force within your psyche, as well as a different force in nature. So one of the main Orishas, like the first Orisha that was coming into me, was Eshu, who is Vodun counterpart is Legba, right? In Santeria and Lukumi, um, that counterpart is known as Elegua. But this particular deity is the deity that you meet at the crossroads. A lot of times he visits people because he kind of opens up the way for you to walk that particular path. And he's very distinct. He'll wear red and black. You'll see his colors around. If you was to make an offering to a crossroads, like take something like maybe spray some rum at the crossroads, leave a cigar, chances are you're going to see his colors around. Okay, so this is a very, very, it's not as subtle. It's very in your face. So you have Eshu. Eshu is the opener of the way. So his equivalent in Kemet would be more like Afuat, Sebek, Ampu. He can embody and encompass all those aspects in the Kemetic tradition. Because what he does, he opens the way. And if you want to talk to the other Rishas, you talk to him. You talk to Eshu. You know, there's Obatala. Obatala has been translated to mean the owner of the white cloth or the chief of the white cloth. Thus, um, he is often shown in white attire. He deals with the fabric of creation. The snail is sacred to Obatala because of the patience that the snail represents and the coolness, right? Obatala deals with coolness. When something cools down, therefore it's habitable. When our planet first was being formed, it was not habitable for us. So in order for us to live, it had to cool off. So Obatala represents consciousness, coolness, dreams, and higher levels of consciousness. Hence, the mountain is sacred to Obatala. We call it Oke, right? You have Yemoja, right? So these are some of the more popular, well-known Orishas. Yemoja, which means the mother of the fish. And Lukumi, the pronunciation gets a little bit different because time went on. The Spanish influence, they didn't pronounce the J. So she became Yemaya. So Yemaya represents the mother. Now here in the diaspora, they say Yemaya represents the surface, right, of the ocean and the salt water, while Olokun represents the depth of the ocean. But Olokun means the owner of the ocean. Yemaya, here her color is blue and white. In Africa, her color is white, right? And she was the surrogate mother of Shango, or the mother of Shango. Shango is also the spirit of royalty, the king. The Lukumi and people of Santeria consider Shango to be the king of their religion. There's a story where they talk about Shango being historical as the fourth Olafin in Yoruba land, right? Who was a descendant of Oromia. So Shango represents courage, loyalty, also justice. So when it comes to the court system, dealing with paperwork, that's connected to Shango as well, right? And then you have Oshun. Oshun, she represents sweetness. She brings sweetness into our lives. It says that she brings the ingredient that was necessary in order for creation to thrive. And that is she's the desire. She's the desire to be. In order for you to have that desire, there's a sweetness in what you want to experience in life. However, she is very powerful. So she represents that feeling that you tap into, that you need to tap into for things to manifest. And they talk about emotion. Oshun and Yamaja both represent that emotional aspect of us that can be transmuted into imagination, like for Oshun, and Yamaja, dealing with intuition, the intuitive aspect. Oya, Oya. Now, some say that that is Shango's ride or die. Oya, she represents hurricane. She represents the marketplace. And people often identify her with the spirits of the dead because she is connected to that gungun. Her color is nine. So the hurricane represents Oya, but also the winds, the breath. And she, along with her husband, Shango, are responsible for storms, right? But she brings in the hurricane. Shango brings in the thunder and the lightning. But there's a story where she took on some of Shango's power. So in Yahweh Lightning Storm, that's Shango and Oya working together, right? Then you have the sacred of veggie twins. They represent duality, the dual nature of the cosmos and everything else. You know, twins, all twins represent a veggie. And in the Yoruba people are known to have like the most twins in the world. So a lot of times you see that you have family members that seem to have such twins, chances are that they're of Yoruba descent. You know.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So, something we've talked about before, and I'd like for you to kind of expound on it here. But before I get to that, let me not get ahead of myself. When it comes to the Yoruba and the Neteru, or some of the different deities or forces of nature, okay, in the Kemetic culture, typically, as far as the conversations I was able to have with certain individuals, they say that Imhotep was once a historical figure who later became deified. Do you believe that that's possible for any other one of those forces where they were historical at some point? Or do you believe they're all predominantly forces, energies, things like that? What's your take on those forces?
Well, from time to time, you may have, it could be a number of things, right? And there has been times when we have deified certain ancestors. First of all, we go back to the Osarian tradition, where it's a Osir. You can become an Osir, right? If you're a true voice, you can become one Osir. So when they look into the Purdue Haru, it's actually the papyrus of Ani or Anui. So when he goes through the whole process after having passed the trial of the 42 judges, he has now become an Osir. Now, in the Yoruba tradition, it is believed that if you're a priest of a certain Orisha, when you leave this physical body, you are joined with that Orisha. You're joined with the energies of that Orisha. However, from time to time, they say that there was a historical man named Shango, right? Now, Shango existed as a force before the historical person did. Some would say that was Jakuta, the stone thrower. And Shango, it said that because he had a conflict with two of his generals, it led to his suicide. Now, in the Yoruba tradition, whenever someone who is a king may violate or may do something other than what they're supposed to do, they're sent to parrot's eggs and they're told that you have to commit ritual suicide in order to maintain your honor. And if you're sent those parrot's eggs and if you refuse to do it, anyone has permission to kill you. Well, the story is that Shango caused two of his generals to fight to the death. One of them died, and the general who survived, he had been friends with the other general, so he came after Shango, and Shango fled and took his wives with him. Oya was the only one that stayed with him. So Shango decided that he would hang himself. So the story goes that with Oya, when she went into the forest and she saw, where Shango had supposedly hang himself. Another story said that he went into a hole in the ground and then fused with Obatala or connected with Obatala and became an Orisha that way. And then there's the other story that said that um, the devotees of Shango, they deified him and made him an Orisha. And there was a violent storm that took place after Shango. Around the time they say that Shango was supposed to have committed suicide. So the priesthood around that particular king went and told the rest of those in that particular community, that city, that Shango is still alive and the king did not hang, but has in fact ascended and become an Orisha. So there are places where the Orishas are actually buried in Yoruba land. But you see, keep in mind that these are strong personalities who embody the qualities of those Orishas. So they are considered to be the incarnations of those Orishas. So in that regard, yes, there's the Arumale, right? Those are the primordial Orisha. But another aspect of Orisha is that which is planted and respected. The first Orisha or the Orisha, when they are uh, paid tribute to or worship, if you may, there is a container in which the Orisha is put in and buried in the ground. But also when you go to initiation, you have that Orisha inserted into your crown. So the Orisha is seated and buried in the earth as well as in your head, in your Orisha. So you
Okay.
become a breathing manifestation of that Orisha.
All right. So that leads into my next question, which again is something you and I've talked about a bit before, but um many people would listen to you or me talk about all these different cultures and it's like, man, pick one. Why are you so scattered? What's going on?
Uh-huh.
Um and it really comes down to being able to recognize authentic divinity wherever it is.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Talk about that a little bit.
when Osir was murdered by Set, his body parts were scattered throughout the land, and every body part, a shrine was erected. You know, I see that as far as the world's religion representing variances. But I also have a theory that, I can also go by the theory that we had a pre-cataclysmic civilization, and because of what took place on this planet, in order for us to preserve that knowledge, we may have created or established religions wherever we were at, trying to hold on to that memory. You see, one of the things that makes it difficult is the fact that we have had many libraries that were burned and destroyed. And a lot of times that information would be preserved. Some of it would be preserved. I'm going to go over something really quick, right? I'm going to talk about some of these libraries because there's a method to this madness. Because what we're doing is we're gathering the pieces of Osir. The Yorubas talk about the shattered and scattered calabash. We're bringing these pieces of the calabash back together. You see what I mean? Humanity represents that scattering. You know, the light that, as Shua said, to divide up and distribute eventually comes back together into oneness. So, if the Yoruba claim that they have the oldest tradition on earth, then why not gather its pieces? If the Commission say that it's the oldest tradition on earth, why not gather its pieces? That means if you have the oldest tradition, then every other tradition is a fragment of your tradition. So, looking at it that way, we can also understand that the reason why things got scattered is because humans migrate, of course, and of course there was wars. But there's another thing that I want to talk about, and there's a book called the Coburn Bible. You familiar? You may be familiar with the Coburn Bible. It talks about how the ancient Commissions that saw the destroyer coming from the heavens, and how it basically brought terror upon the people. It made the air unbreathable. It caused the forest to burn. It talks about people being destroyed at that point in time. And basically, the people who had wrote the Coburn Bible, they were commissions. That book, the first six parts of it anyway, comes out of Kenya. The other five comes from the Celtic people or the Celts. So they brought that together in Glastonbury in London, right, or England, where that library eventually was destroyed as well. They had a copy of that, and which was just introduced and revealed to the public in 1994. So it talks about what happened to humanity. Now, some will say that they attribute that to the 10 plagues of Moses, right? You know, and what they could have experienced was some type of destruction of civilization in general, you see, and the fall of humanity. If you go throughout the world, you look, there's caves in France and there's caves somewhere else. I can't remember, not France though, but there's literally caves of people with their hands sticking up and there's flames around their hands, like these people are in terror. Something is happening. They're seeing the world be destroyed and everything is burning. So what they did is that they went to the caves, they began to write, they began to try to record the best that they could. So when they talk about aliens and stuff like that, and the sons of, keep in mind, hybrids, a mule, right? Two mules cannot reproduce. Hybrids cannot reproduce because they're not of the same species. So we're talking about angels that's supposed to come down and made love to the children of men or the women, you know. What people need to understand is that what we were calling angels and even aliens were simply advanced humans from the prior civilization. They wanted to hold on to that knowledge. And for whatever reason, it was frowned upon for them to share that knowledge with the people who are not ready to receive it. And maybe the reason why is because before you can take on such knowledge, you have to go through an educational process. Because if you look at us today, you can see where our technology supersedes our wisdom. We have technology. So it shows that humanity has the knowledge, but we also seem to lack the wisdom of utilizing it correctly without using it for wars. And then when we look throughout our history, we'll see where we actually destroyed libraries around the planet every time there was a war. And there's a list of libraries I'm going to talk about, right? Of course, you know, the greatest destruction in the world took place to the Library of Alexandria, where all that knowledge was brought together and all those books were burned. It took months to burn those books. Now, there's beliefs that some of those books made it into the Vatican, right? Some of those books and people who wanted to keep that knowledge, it was preserved in jars and buried in the sand, like the Nag Hammadi text and, and brass, which led to the preservation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, because you had these religious fanatics and zealots going around saying that if we catch you with this heresy, we can hang you and kill you, you know. So you had all that. And I wanted to talk about like the destruction of these various libraries, even in the one in Glastonbury that took place in 1539. Um, that is where the Coven Bible comes from. Then there's the Library of Celsus, which was destroyed in 262, where 12,000 scrolls were destroyed. The Library of Ashurbanipal was destroyed. The Library of Congress was burned by the British. The first Library of Congress was burned by the British, where 3,000 books were destroyed, right? So, you have this, and I wanted to just go, because I also took notes of this. Um, you had all these things that were destroyed, they're removed from you. And then let's talk about what happened among the Aztecs. 3 great libraries were destroyed by the Spanish. They wiped out all the Mayans' literary art, okay? So every time there was a war, and even the library in Timbuktu today, right? Recently, like in 2012, 2014, they attacked one of the libraries and destroyed thousands of books, right? And they also had annexed the libraries in Iraq, the museum, and everything else, and took a lot of knowledge. Some of it may survive on the black market, but a lot of stuff is destroyed. So every time there's a war, there's the destruction of knowledge. So people forget. You see what I mean? And when you're trying to look for the primary sources of stuff, you can't find it because it's been destroyed. So they can just say, oh, that's a bunch of pseudoscience. You're making it up. You see? And unfortunately, you also have to deal and contend with information that cannot be verified. So that doesn't make our work any easier. So when we make these connections, we're seeing where there's a common source in which these people have tapped into, and a common memory, which appears to be different religions. All the stories of the resurrected Christ, the king who is resurrected and so forth, and being born of a virgin, and the divine mother goddess, and all that. These are very universal. You find them in different forms all over the planet. You see, there's evidence that people build boats and travel by ship, even though you may say that these people may not have been a seafaring people, but then you go and look on some of their rock art and you see boats. So there's a lot of things in which we have to take a look at, because unfortunately, we have been lied to by people who want to to control your access to knowledge as well as your access to spirit. And if they can control that, they can keep you disempowered, you see. And there are people who are kind of worried about that. I believe a lot of these religions that are talking about the end of time and the destruction coming are warning us because they experienced something, and they're telling us it's something that may happen periodically that we may want to keep our eyes on, that we may want to be on the lookout for. And I believe that the Catholic Church knows about this, which is why they have a telescope, a very powerful telescope where they're looking into the heavens. What are they looking into the heavens for? And to my understanding, in the Vatican, there's like a depiction of a globe showing a rock smashing into it, which is representing the destruction of the world. So they understand that there is disasters that take place through the various ages. So this goes back to what was talked about by Solon, you know, and in Plato's Timaeus, where he is talking to the Commission priest, and the Commission priest says that you Greeks are but children, and there's not an old man among you. And what he is telling them is this: you guys don't remember, but we have kept records that there have been cycles of civilizations prior to this one. So this is why they talk about Atlantis and everything else. Now, of course, we see the ruins of Kemet, so we can trace that back. Those and that found in Mesopotamia, you know, and further down now into the southern part of Africa where they have Adam's calendar. We see those ruins, so we can say that, oh, these are very ancient. And we do not, unfortunately, we may not have writings, or we may not have deciphered the languages or all the symbolism, but we do see evidence of a civilization that has been forgotten. And then in Kemet, they still haven't reached the bottom of all those civilizations. And it kind of blows me away that we continue to go by how the Egyptologists want to date the first dynasty back to 3100 and act like that's when the Egyptian civilization began. They're still finding temples and pyramids or temples underneath the sand that they have not even dug down in yet. So how are you going to keep on saying that Kemet starts in 3100 and you're saying that's the dynastic era, knowing that there's a pre-dynastic era? And plus, they have wisdom keepers that say that the civilization, that the Sphinx goes back to be at 10,000 years old. Herodotus was told that the Sphinx was about 10,000 years old around the time when he had visited Kemet. So they had all this knowledge about being able to talk to the priest. The priest told them that the Sphinx is older than what the Egyptologists want to tell you that it is today. And we're still going by academia. Academia is part of what is controlling our minds because they only want us to go so far. There's been people who have found sites and they will not fund them because they don't want them to get too deep and shake up the status quo. So there are people who continue to repeat the same bull crap over and over again that they learn from academia, and they keep you painting in the lines. And then you got the thought police. So when you paint too far outside the lines, they can say that you're kicking pseudoscience. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that you just want to make up any damn thing you want, you know, but unfortunately, there's a lot of information that we do have. Like for instance, there's Doriel's Thought the Atlantean. That's popular now, and not to take anything away from our brother Billy Carson. He's been, talking about a lot of deep, subjects. But in my personal research, I cannot find the primary source to those emerald tablets. There is one emerald tablet, but I cannot find a source to Doriel's emerald tablet for Thought the Atlanteans. They say they're somewhere, but we got to take their word for it. You see, same with the Book of Mormon, and they have the gold plates that Joseph Smith's supposed to have buried somewhere where conveniently there's no pictures of these tablets. All we know is that there's books written that claim that it comes from these tablets. You see what I mean? So you have to kind of have a very balanced way of seeing things because spirit also downloads information to us from time to time. We may be picking up on the collective field of the ancestors, and they may actually show us visions. But unfortunately, you can't use that in academia. You see what I mean? So,
yeah. It's a perfect balance of, I guess you could say, skepticism and mysticism.
correct. Yes, bring it
It's
into
like,
balance.
don't be gullible, but be open-minded.
Exactly. Exactly. Don't take it too far. You know what I mean? Allow yourself a little leeway for the possibility that there's truth to this. They may be onto something. you know. But unfortunately, a lot of people will go the other extreme and they may not really research anything. They just hear somebody on YouTube say something and they'll take it as gospel, you know. So, it's discipline. Knowledge comes to us in stages. And when you get this knowledge, you may have an initial interpretation of it. And as time goes on, your mind may open where the knowledge has more depth to it. You see what I mean? But you digest information in stages. And this is why I think American education is it hasn't been very successful in trying to get people to internalize knowledge. Because, first of all, they try to cram all this knowledge into your head and move on to the next subject. But if you was dealing with a holistic ancient education, you'll go through repetitive processes to digest this information. So when you read a book the first time, your mind for the first time is being introduced to this information, which is why when you read the book a second time, you start to process information that you didn't process at first. And it'll feel like you didn't even read that part of the book at first because your mind just simply didn't process.
I've
Because,
heard some people say that when you're reading a book, you got to read it 9 times to get the whole book.
right, yeah, yeah, you know, um, yeah, because your mind is saying, okay, well now since I've digested this part, now I can digest that part. You see what I mean? You go to college, they'll have you read a book on psychology, right, which covers many different subjects within itself, and you may just read a third of the book after you done paid like 80 to 100 to $150 for the textbook that you're not going to use again. you know. So that's how we're educated. They don't take education seriously here. Remember what John D. Rockefeller said. We don't want them. He says he didn't want a nation of thinkers. He wanted a nation of workers.
Workers.
See, and I mean, you do need people to work, but if people were enlightened, you wouldn't have to make them work. They'll do it because they have the desire to, because they're connected to their innermost self. You see what I mean? You wouldn't
Like,
have to make people work.
think about that. Right now, they're developing AI, and people are afraid of robots taking some of the jobs because
Mm-hmm.
Rockefeller got his wish. Their identities in their work.
Yes, yes,
You raise a community, a world of thinkers, a country of thinkers, would have been had stuff working for us, and we just to go out, we get to be mystics, we get to just be creative, do art. It's like we look at the ancient world and we're like, wow, look at the art. How come we don't have that? Well, we all at work.
right, exactly.
We all at work.
Exactly. you
No,
know?
no one
Yeah,
has time to sculpt beautiful sculptures or paint beautiful murals. We don't
right,
really have time. We got to go to work.
right. Yes. So much of your mental energy is exhausted going to work. You see, so if you're not physically tired, you're mentally tired. So
Yeah.
that's where energy is going because they discovered a way of how to take your energy and use your energy for what they want to do. And then, like for instance, the elite, their children don't go to school like you and I. They have mentors. While you're sitting in a classroom listening to some teacher, and I'm not saying don't learn, but we just have to put this into perspective. Why their children are being told and taught how to run the banks and everything else. They're flying on the plane with their mentor. They're about to go and fly. They might about to go to Hawaii or India or whatever, and they're going on a yacht while you're sitting in the classroom being told that this is what God wants you to do. You see what I mean? So, they're mentored. That's how they're educated.
And I
We're just
see people are starting to break away from that. More and more people are doing homeschooling instead of public schooling now. I've been seeing a lot of people break away from that.
yes, yes. And what's interesting is that the children actually enjoy learning more so as opposed to being in a classroom of 30 to 60 other children in which, you have like one or two teachers, maybe a teacher and assistant. They can't even get to you if you have questions, so
The
jump
only
rope,
difference between American public school and prison is that you get to go home at the end of the day if you
right?
in public school.
Right? Yeah,
You
yeah,
it's the same food, same strict schedule, same monitoring, same yeah, it's the same trap. But
yeah.
going back a bit to the connections, right? we're talking. I noticed when you were going through some of the Netzeru or some of the Orishas, you were mentioning counterparts.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and I remember you and I were talking a bit before, and you were telling me an experience about Shango, and I was saying that one of the counterparts of Shango is Thor.
Hmm.
And then you had an experience that also confirmed that they're the same entity, just expressed through different cultures.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That was the time when I actually had went to get a consultation from a lady. This is at a market. So I sat down in front of her and she told me that I see Thor standing behind you. And this was around the time when I was told that Shango was my Orisha. You see, where they got the same energy, they do a lot of the same stuff. Then I found out, in Palo they have a deity called Siete Rayos, which means seven thunderbolts, and they consider that to be the counterpart of Shango in the Palo tradition. Well, that entity is, over me as well. So the thing about it is that, whether we want to say that they're the same or different, I say counterparts because a lot of people get caught up on, oh, they're not the same, and they want to argue and all that, and I just don't have time for it. I'm like, look, just do your research, pay attention, and see where they connect. You see what I mean? We
Because
all. Mhm.
Yeah, because a lot of us, like in whatever tradition it is, you have the all in all. You have my God's everywhere. He's omnipresent, but he's not allowed to be in the culture I don't like. I have these African deities that are omnipresent and omnipotent, but they can't be in Europe. No Europeans can encounter
Right,
them.
right, exactly.
So it's like they're that powerful, but it's like, don't you think it's possible that people somewhere else can encounter the same entity or the same energy, the same force, and just call it something different?
Hmm. Yeah, indeed. Unfortunately, humanity is being indoctrinated to only see differences, you know, and it serves to control us that way. You know, they divide us up with race, they divide us up with gender, they divide us up with age, and then they create situations where people are easily offended by everything these days. So there's people are more or less talking, but unfortunately they're not really listening. You see, and plus they want to get out their own realizations, which is understandable. But one of the things that we have to develop when it comes to communication is the ability to hear, the ability to listen with patience. You see what I mean? Because a lot of times, it can be a challenge. Sometimes a little bit of dialogue, a little bit of debate, I think is healthy. People don't have to agree with everything, but a lot of times the things in which we see is very different or more similar than we care to admit you know, even with the idea of like the haplogroups, throughout Africa, they have E1B1A going from West Africa to what they now call Egypt. That haplogroup is still the majority in these areas, all the way into India. So that just simply shows the genetic journey that humanity has taken. We're still going on journeys, and unfortunately, they're still burning libraries. They're still destroying ancient wisdom teaching. So, when you study these things, somebody's got to do some writing. Somebody's got to do some recording. Maybe somebody needs to go to Kemet and make sure that when you go to Kemet, you're taking pictures. See, they're trying to stop people from taking pictures, by the way. They're trying to make it like illegal to take pictures in some places. Why would they want to do that? So we got to ask the question, why are they so invested in you forgetting? You see, but learning is actually remembering what your spirit already knows. Remembering is bringing the pieces that were scattered back into oneness. See.
So, in your journey, and just because of my audience, I'll ask this on behalf of them.
Mhm.
Dealing with the figure Yeshua, what have been some counterparts that you can see in other cultures
Mhm.
that you've been able to notice? It's like, okay, this seems similar.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, here's the thing. You know, we see the combination of Haru. We see elements of Haru and Wasir within Jesus, right? And it makes sense for him to say, "I and the Father are one." You can see both. Both Haru and Osir went through a birth and resurrection, right? So you also see Radha Govinda, which is basically Krishna and his wife, right? To me, that's a connection between that and the story of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, or Magdalene being considered. And please don't take offense to this. A lot of people talk about the sacred prostitute and they consider her Mary Magdalene because some hater who was a Catholic priest wanted to identify her with Horton. But there's the story of Mary. There's the story of Mary Magdalene. There's the story of Jesus or Yeshua. Yeshua means salvation, or Yahweh salvation. Jesus means salvation. Isa, um, you see that Isa, there's Saint Isa. Isa, there's a connection. Isa, which means physician. There's the Essenes, who were the physicians. So we see where Jesus has a lot to do with healing. He was the great healer, right? And there's a lot of other interesting stories around that. But he went through his death and he went through his resurrection. And he went through his virgin birth. He went through his journey. We see what he did. He became into a place of knowing at the age of 12. He had his 12 disciples. You look at Shango. Shango had his birth and resurrection. And by the way, Shango has 12 other avatars. You see, so you're starting to see that number 12, right? Then there's the story of Mithras. Mithras, that's in Rome. That's also found, that goes all the way back to Asia, all the way into India. There's the story of Mithras also going through a birth and resurrection and very similar stories. So there's a story, I think it's called the 16 Messiahs or the 16 Christ. I'm trying to think if that was by Joseph Campbell. It's been a long time.
I
But
think I have it.
so yeah. Um, it goes into that. Pardon me, I have some company that just came about. I thought it was coming at 2. They came a little early.
All right. Let's see. All right. So we were talking about some of Yeshua's counterparts.
Yeah, so you had pointed out in one of our conversations, our recent conversation about Yeshua and Jesus being identified with the fish, right? So there's a story about the Dogon, one of the 8 ancestors, represented by a fish or as a fish, called Nomo. And this form of Nomo sacrifices himself to bring balance into the world. So he shares his body to be eaten by the people, and the bones are thrown into the water, where 3 days later he's restored. So in other words, resurrected. You see what I mean? So there's the story of the fish. Another story of the fish is dealing with, in fact, the Native American tradition. It may be among the Shalagi or Cherokee. It's one of the traditions I recall where they eat the fish, and then basically the fish, when they throw the bones back into the river, it becomes alive again. So it represents a sacrifice, in the age of Pisces. If you look at the zodiac and you look 180 degrees, away from Pisces, you have Virgo. They talk about the fish being born of the Virgin. You see, or Jesus being born of the Virgin. So, from what I can see, the avatar of Yeshua, or the avatar that represents the Christ, within the form of the fish, in the age in which we are moving out of, more into the age of what they now call Aquarius. We're coming out of the Piscean era, which is I believe, into the knowing, which is I know, which is Aquarius, dealing with the mental. You see, so we're running across a lot of people with heavy mental, a lot of mental energies. As far as Yeshua representing a cosmic entity, we're seeing where people are saying that Yeshua was also known as Saint Isa. Now, I have to be honest in this element of my research, because they're saying that Yeshua or the form Isa had been to India and so forth. There's a book called Unto Thee I Grant, right? And I can't remember the name of the author. Hold on, let me see if I put the name of the author down. Well, unfortunately, I think it was it's Nicholas Notovich, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was also connected with a book called The Unknown Life of Christ, right? Where they talked about him going into, supposedly he went to Tibet. But unfortunately, a lot of material has not been verified, making it, super clear on whether Isa or Saint Isa was Jesus or not. It would make sense, but at the same time, I have to make sure, I'm trying to see if I can actually verify that. Now there is a Saint Thomas, uh, Saint Thomas temple in Kerala in India. They say that Saint Thomas, which was actually doubting Thomas, was supposed to establish a church around maybe I'm gonna say maybe 55, 50 something AD, right? Claiming that he had been the first missionary to bring the message of Christ to India. But then we look at the story of Krishna and we see aspects of that reflect the story of Christ as well. You know, we see that he was Krishna when he was a baby. He was transplanted into the body of a fish when he cut the fish open. So in a way, the fish became like the mother of Krishna, because the king Kansa was trying to murder him when he was born, right? Remember, the king always looked for the baby and trying to murder the babies when the babies, to make sure that baby doesn't grow up and remove him from his throne, right? The same mythos is around what went down with Moses, you know, and Jesus was put in the manger, right? Moses was put into a basket and sailed down the river. In the Yoruba tradition, it talks about a king who was placed inside of a kafir or kafir and sailed down the river down to Benin. Similar story. So when he opened up the kafir, the king became, or he became the king of Benin at that time. So in his land, he was mistreated. He became the king when he was sailed down the river. So there's another story too. Another thing is as far as like even within the Bible, you see parallels between Joseph, you know, and Jesus. You see parallels between Yeshua, Jesus. I believe that these are all the same. There's also the story of Tutankhamun. Now, there's a story of Tutankhamun where they also say that he asked Ahmed, the brother who wrote the book, I think it was Ahmed Osman, and another brother another guy by the name of I'm trying to think of his name right now, Mustafa Gadala. They're convinced that Tutankhamun was Yeshua or Jesus, and that Moses was Akhenaten. And that's basically their position on the whole thing. But of course, they went through their own death and resurrection rituals, being the king, because these are rituals that kings go through. On their 28-year jubilee, the king has to go through a death and resurrection ritual where he dies and he's resurrected, renewed, because he has to embody that process of regeneration. You see? So these are stories of what takes place with the king. The king goes through the process of regeneration. Yeshua was said to have been the king of the Jews. He was asked by Pontius Pilate, which breaks down to Pontius Pilatus, which means deep water, which is interesting because they thought that Christ walked on water. He suffered under deep water. He submerged or appeared to have been submerging into the water. You see what I mean? So there's symbolism around that whole thing. There's also the theory that Jesus, by Ralph Ellis, he appears to be at the understanding that Jesus could have actually been the grandson of Cleopatra, or even the son of Cleopatra. There's that theory of him being of the lineage of Cleopatra. So, as far as them having a historical possibility of Christ, and then there's also the spiritual connection to Christ, where Christ is placed into a tomb and then resurrected. There's a story of Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl is said to have had a jealous brother who had him murdered, and eventually he would be placed into a casket, and then later on he would be resurrected. There's also a story that he promised to return to the people and to liberate the people. Some say that he had went away and that he had promised to return. A lot of us are still waiting for the Christ to return.
Okay. And the book you were looking for earlier was the World's 16 Crucified Saviors by Kersey Graves.
Ah, Percy Graves, got you, got you. There's another one. It was by Joseph Campbell, And I want to say maybe it was Hero with a Thousand Faces or something like that. But
Mhm.
he also talks about the universality of the Christ uh, mythos, which I believe represents a part of our collective psyche. Because not only does it talk about the Christ, not only is it the King, but it's also us, right? The Yeshua that dwells within ourselves, the King that dwells within ourselves that's been suppressed. He has to be resurrected. And if you get into Rosicrucian science, it teaches that if you want to take on the embodiment of Christ, and you learn about Christ, and you become as close to mimicking the life of Christ as you possibly can. You know, there's another parallel. It's in our modern times. That's a reflection of Christ, and that's Superman. Superman comes from the house of El. Jesus, when he was first born, he was Emmanuel. In Ethiopia, Jesus is called Amen El. In Ethiopia, in a book called The Bounded of Righteousness, that they call the Ethiopian Book of the Dead by E. A. Wallace Budge. It calls Yeshua, one of his names is Amenel, right? In the form of Emmanuel. They translate Emmanuel to mean God is with us. But Emmanuel, Iman or Iman means the trustworthy one. And Kemet, Amun and Amen means the hidden one. But hey, you're trusting in something that is hidden. This is the concept of faith, right? You have the trustworthy one is with us, Emmanuel. And then there's a book in the book of Revelation, Jesus is referred to as the Amen, right? Well, if Jesus was the lamb that was slain, Amun and Amen, one of his symbols is the ram. You see? Now, there's also in Ethiopia where they have a yearly celebration for Jesus, you know, where they will eat of the lamb. So the lamb is sacrificed and eaten. So once again, you're going through the ritual of taking in the the, uh, the essence of Christ in the form of the lamb, in which people have the feast of the lamb. That's what that's about. Taking in
Yeah.
the Because it's believed in the ancient world, whenever you eat something, you take on its power.
Mhm.
So that story of Christ, you eat the bread and drink of the blood of Christ, you're taking on the power of Christ because now you become the living embodiment of Christ because you've taken in the energy of Christ. In the Catholic Church, they call that the doctrine of transubstantiation.
Mhm. In the Kemetic culture, there's the Feast of Asar, where they take the bread in the shape of Asar, break it, so it's literally "This is my body broken for you," and they usually wash it down with beer and wine.
Yo, yo, so you're eating plant life, right? So the salvation is coming through the food that's coming back to life around spring over here, right? In this neck of the woods, spring and summer. So this is where life is growing. Now you're taking in the essence of life, eating living foods. See, now a lot of people, of course, the sinners, they're going to say, "Oh, this is cannibalism. You're eating the flesh of Christ, and you're basically representing the old pagan tradition." But a lot of times, people may not necessarily get the full gist of what that means, because they'll go through a collective ritual where everybody will partake and become the embodiment of the spirit that they represent. Also, being aligned with what they call the Holy Spirit, Helios, Solar, Ra, White Dove, the Hawk, all that representing the Holy Spirit, the solar spirit, the holy breath, the solar breath, in which operates through you when you are aligned. So now let's talk about the Holy Spirit operating through the individual. When you're totally guided by by the Holy Spirit, this mind that we utilize moves out the way so that the mind of God can operate within you. So we're here to embody the Creator. We're here to embody the divine and be the divine vehicle in which the Supreme can express itself. And that's how we become Christ-like, Christ conscious, or inactivate what is called your Buddha nature, which is the enlightened aspects of it. There's a story. In fact, there's also a story, one story that talks about Buddha being born of a virgin too.
Mhm.
You know, then we look at Buddha. Bud in Sanskrit means to open. To bud means to open, right? What does kata mean?
The opener.
You see, kata survives in the Arabic language as al fatah, That's one of Allah's 99 attributes. So the first prayer is called the Fatiha. So we haven't gotten away from it. The knowledge is still there. We just got to be able to see it. We got to be able to look at Amun and Ra. We have to be able to see things which are hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, because
All
they
right.
left all the stuff there and just covered it in bias.
Indeed. 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 They talk
So
about the gift of the spirit of discernment.
yeah. So before we get out of here, I'd like for you to talk just a little bit about Reiki.
Reiki has been translated to mean universal life force energy, right? Reiki also means spiritually guided energy. So it has a lot to do with moving self out of the way so that you become a vessel. That's why it says just for today, do not anger, do not worry, um, be respectful, make your living honestly, and basically be grateful. Okay. So gratitude is one of the ways in which you can manifest more things into your life by having gratitude. However, you become the vessel of this energy. So I do attunements. I got attuned like maybe back in 2000, back in 1997. That's when I think I had I got my second attunement back in 1997. So by 2000, I had all three attunements. So there's three attunements. There's kind of like even in masonry, you got three levels in which before you consider, two other levels before you consider the master mason. Well, the same thing goes with Reiki. There's three levels, right? They talk about 33. All those are add-ons. There's three. So basically, there's the entry level, right? And then there's the level in which you're actually a practitioner. You're recognized as a practitioner because you're learning how to work with the emotional body, with the mental body, and how to send Reiki long distance. And the third level, what they consider to be the master level, is when you can attune others. Now, I want to remind people when it comes to working with Reiki, people don't really. I think Reiki needs a lot more respect than what it gets. Now, the system of Reiki, as we know it today, comes from Dr. Mikao Usui, that comes out of Japan. But the principle of Reiki is very ancient. The principle of Reiki, as far as the energy that we're tapping into, it does not come from any one place. It is everywhere. It's just so happened, and that's the system that people connect to. So, as a Reiki master, I also learned another modality called Saikin and Shekim. Now, the story about Shechem is that you had a guy by the name of Patrick Ziegler. He went and laid in the Great Pyramid and he experienced himself being downloaded by these energies. So then when he went to the Sudan, he ran across the Sutu Sheikh, a brother in Sudan, and he blessed him and gave him the Baraka and initiated him into his Sufi order. He felt the same energy. However, he did not know how to pass his energy on. The Sheikh had passed away. So when he came to the States, he got attuned to Reiki, and he discovered that by utilizing Reiki as the vehicle, he can also pass on the Shekhem energy. So I've also had that modality as well. It's an energy
Okay.
that's him, aka Shekhem meaning power and energy, and life force energy, and so forth.
And
So
just for clarity's sake, the attunements, those would be the same as like an initiation or I guess if we're talking Hinduism, a Shaktipat, a transmission.
yeah, I say like a transmission, but here's the difference. It's like a Shakti pod, but here's the thing. When it comes to Reiki, I want to make it clear I'm opening the person up through attunement, right? It's not just that I'm passing my energy to them. I'm opening them up, and they made agreement there. They're going to be the vehicle in which they're going to allow this energy to work through themselves to heal others. You see, so with Reiki, you learn about how to work with the emotional body. You have to work with the emotional body as well as the physical body because a lot of times your physical ailments, they start off in the higher levels, in the subtle levels, and then he manifests in the physical level. So if you are able to remove the negative energy, right, that's causing someone to feel pain, whether it's intestinal discomfort, whether it's a headache, whether it's a fractured bone, because Reiki is going to speed up the healing process. Um, it's good for you also to work with it on the emotional body because if it's still in the emotional body, the ailment will come back. So you got to clear it out of the emotional body as well. So With Reiki, you can use it with plants, you can use it with children, you can use it on animals, you can actually use it on objects, you can raise the vibration. This when you're doing the alchemy, because the ultimate goal of alchemy is when you can spiritualize matter, you can do that with Reiki as well.
Okay. All right. So we're getting ready to close. If you could, where are some places where people can connect with you, partner with you? You have any websites, any books coming out?
So right now, I'm working on my book Solarization. I also do divination for those who are interested in connecting with the Orisha. Um, you can contact me. Well, I'm gonna eventually open up another Facebook page because I'm kind of full right now. But you can go to Khepra, Ptah, Khepra, and also you can go to Khepra underscore Ptah for my IG. That's in Instagram. And on YouTube, I have a YouTube channel, which is KPTAH 360, right? On YouTube. You go there and you'll pull me up as Ancient Wisdom Keeper.
Awesome. Well, if you could release a blessing for the audience as we go.
Certainly. I give thanks and praise to the power of all the Netzaru. I give thanks and praise to the power of the ancestors. I ask that each and every one of you be blessed. May you continue to go on your journey. May you make discoveries. May you obtain life, strength, and health. And may you have a long life full of prosperity. In the name of my teacher, Baba Hedi Kapra, and as well as his teacher, Baba Heru Ankrasamase Pata, I say Anecharaka Mara, Uditera Mara, Anuka Mara, Necharaka Mara, Uditera Mara, Anuka Mara, and Necharaka Mara, Uditera Mara, Anuka Mara. May each and every one of you inherit the powers of Amun Ra. May you awaken your indwelling spirit and be blessed.
Yes. All right. Again, thank you for joining me here today. This has been a great conversation.
Likewise. Likewise.
And y'all, until next time, later.